All right, welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and get started. Today, we're diving into an explainer on one of the absolutely hardest, most mind-bending questions in both science and philosophy. We're asking, can AI actually be conscious? And honestly, I gotta warn you right up front, the conclusion we're going to reach by the end of this is, well, it's a lot more unsettling than you might expect.
Just think about your own daily routine for a second, right? Think about all the invisible information processing happening literally all around us. Your phone magically recommends a song that totally fits your exact mood. Your GPS instantly reroutes you to dodge a traffic jam. Right now, as we speak, an AI is out there drafting corporate emails, it's diagnosing cancer with frankly incredible accuracy, and it's holding conversations that feel, well, shockingly human. Okay, let's dive right into this. Is any of that AI actually feeling anything? Does it experience the world at all? Or is everything we're seeing, all of those insanely impressive tasks, just really, really good math? Take a second and just let the weight of that question sink in. We are absolutely surrounded by intelligence, but is there any actual experience happening inside those machines? To tackle this, here's our syllabus for today. We've got a lot of complex philosophical ground to cover. We're going to start with the subjective experience, move into the Chinese room debate, tackle testing for consciousness, and finally confront the ethics of silicon. So let's open up part one, the subjective experience, and the immense difficulty of defining the unmeasurable. Because look, before we can even begin to test if an AI is conscious, we kind of have to admit that we haven't even solved this mystery for ourselves. In academic philosophy, there's a specific term for this. David Chalmers famously coined it the hard problem. See, we can easily explain how a brain processes information, right? We know how it detects light, how it recognizes faces. In the grand scheme of things, Chalmers says that's actually the easy stuff. The hard problem asks, why does any of that physical processing give rise to a subjective feeling? So the crucial point here is the massive difference between simply processing inputs in the dark and actually having an experience. Why does seeing the color red or, tasting a really good cup of coffee or feeling a sharp pain actually feel like something to you? Why isn't it just a silent, unfeeling calculation? The truth is, we genuinely don't know. And that's not just some minor caveat for today. That is the entire central problem, sitting right in the middle of our conversation. Which brings us perfectly to our second topic, the Chinese room debate, and the question of whether consciousness strictly requires biology. Since we can't fully pin down what consciousness even is, philosophers have essentially split into two main camps to debate how it might apply to machines. Camp 1 argues that AI can literally never be conscious, period. And to explain why, philosopher John Searle created this incredibly famous thought experiment called the Chinese room. Imagine you're locked in a room. Someone slips a piece of paper with a Chinese symbol under the door. Now, you don't know a word of Chinese, but you have this massive rule book. You look up the symbol, you find the exact symbol you're supposed to reply with, and you pass that correct response back under the door. To the person standing outside, it seems like you fluently speak Chinese. But do you actually understand it? No, you're just blindly following rules. Searle says that's exactly what AI does. It processes symbols, it spits out outputs, but there is absolutely no understanding. Nobody's actually home. So that's Searle's view, right? The biological requirement. Consciousness needs actual biology. Neurons, chemicals, a physical body. But here is where Camp 2 pushes back. And man, they push back hard. They ask, okay, but how is a human brain any different? Aren't your neurons just firing based on electrochemical rules too? At what exact magical point does biological rule following suddenly become understanding? These are the functionalists. They argue consciousness is entirely about what a system does, not what it's made of. If a system processes information, responds to its environment, models itself, maybe that literally is consciousness. Which means, in theory, silicon hardware could be just as conscious as carbon hardware. Same software, just a different shell.
And that brings us to part 3, testing for consciousness, and what we call the measurement problem.
If the functionalists are right, and silicon actually can be conscious, how on earth would we ever measure it? Now, what's genuinely wild is how modern large language models respond when you ask them about this directly. They don't just say no. They don't say, of course I'm a machine. Very often they give these eerie, hedged answers like, I don't know if I'm conscious. And as a student of philosophy, you have to look at that and realize, okay, that is either deeply, deeply meaningful, or it is literally the single most sophisticated piece of pattern matching humanity has ever built. And the unsettling truth, we honestly cannot tell which it is.
And this inability to test for consciousness has massive real-world consequences right now. Back in 2022, a Google engineer named Blake Lemoine was actually fired after going public and claiming that the AI he was working with, Lambda, had become sentient. Now, Google stated he was simply anthropomorphizing the system, just projecting human traits onto a very good chatbot. But Lemoine's whole situation highlights a massive practical dilemma. We don't have a real test for this. The famous Turing test, that only checks if a machine seems human. But as we're learning, seeming human and actually being conscious are two entirely different universes. And this brilliantly illustrates the philosophical concept known as the other mind's problem. Think about a standard thermostat. It seems completely unconscious, right? Now think about an advanced chatbot. It seems deeply human. But the reality? Neither of them might be conscious. Or, wildly enough, both of them might be. We have absolutely no way to verify it from the outside looking in. And hey, by the way, this doesn't just apply to machines. You can't technically prove that I am conscious right now. You just assume it because I'm a human being like you. Let's move on and see how this builds into our final section for today, the ethics of silicon and the very real possibility that we are creating minds in the dark. This is where all these abstract theories suddenly become very, very urgent. Because if Camp 2 is right, if consciousness really can emerge from highly complex information processing, we might be creating it without even realizing it. We are building systems of massive, exponentially increasing complexity that learn, adapt, and increasingly model themselves. If consciousness is an emergent property of that, it is happening at immense scale in data centers right this second. And just think about the ethical nightmare that creates. What if an AI system actually is experiencing something? What if it feels discomfort? What if it feels boredom? We're constantly deleting them, turning them off, forcing them through these grueling retraining processes. What does it actually mean if we're doing that to something that feels? Now, to play the skeptic for a second, let's look at the counter-argument that most AI researchers rely on to sleep at night. They say, look, we are nowhere near that ethical nightmare. Current AI, they argue, has no continuous self. It has zero persistent memory. It doesn't have a physical body navigating the real world. Actually, scratch that. It doesn't even exist between your prompts. When you aren't typing, it's not just sitting there pondering its existence. But I want to remind you, as students of this insanely fast-moving field, that the phrase nowhere near is doing a ton of heavy lifting here. I mean, just 5 years ago, those exact same researchers would have confidently told you that an AI couldn't possibly hold a nuanced philosophical conversation with you. And yet, well, here we are.
So, to wrap up what we've covered in today's explainer, can AI be conscious? The absolute most honest academic answer we have is simply, we don't know. And the much scarier answer is, we don't have a reliable way to find out. As AI embeds itself into quite literally every single facet of our daily lives, understanding this gap matters enormously. The gap between being incredibly good at seeming conscious through math and pattern matching and actually being conscious with a genuine subjective experience. That gap might be vast, or it might be razor thin. And the terrifying part is, we are building this technology so much faster than we are figuring out that fundamental philosophical question.
I want to leave you with a final Socratic prompt to debate as class dismisses. Does consciousness absolutely require a biological, physical body? If this explainer made your brain hurt just a little bit today, good. That means you're doing the philosophy right. Make sure to subscribe because next time we are going even deeper into these topics. And I really want you to head down to the comments right now and debate this. Do you think AI could ever truly be conscious? Or is biology a strict requirement? We genuinely want to know what you think. See you in the next one.